Welcome to the Geometric Trading course, Apprentice Level 2. This is Ross Beck, CEO of Geometric Trading, LLC, and author of the Gartley Trading Method, New Techniques to Profit from the Market's Most Powerful Formation. In the neophyte level of the Geometric Trading course, we discuss the fact that there is geometry in the financial markets. In this introductory session of the Apprentice Level 2, you'll learn how market geometry, or the measurement of price and time, will give you an edge in trading any liquid financial product out there. At the initiate level, we learned about the power of using price extensions and price retracements to identify the completion of Gartley patterns, identifying turning points in advance. I refer to these techniques as VMG techniques, or vertical market geometry techniques. Now, what do I mean by vertical market geometry? Here's a chart of the Australian dollar, and I've used the price retracement technique on this chart, measuring from this low here at 95.38 up to here at 102.56. What I'm doing, I'm measuring price on this axis here on the right-hand side. This is the vertical axis. This is the y-axis of our chart. And that's why I refer to this technique as vertical market geometry. Even though these lines that we plot are horizontal lines, what we're really measuring here is price, which is on the vertical axis. So that's why we call it vertical market geometry. Let's also look at the price extension technique. Here's an example of a price extension. Once again, the Australian dollar, starting from this low up to this high. We measure that range on the vertical axis, and we project that range from this low to give us our 100% price extension. This is all based on vertical market geometry. We're measuring the price range on the y-axis to give us an indicator of where there will be a turning point. Price extensions and price retracements, or VMG, vertical market geometry, is powerful enough on its own to make you a trading success. However, if there was something else that you could add to your trading system to improve the odds of it winning, would you be interested? I would. What can we add? What is that something else that we can add to improve the odds of us winning? The something else that we need is time. Vertical market geometry doesn't include any time analysis. Even though it's on the y-axis, most people don't use it when it comes to trading. Do we need to use it? If most don't use it, why should we? Well, one of the most successful traders of all time used time analysis. Who was he? Who was the pioneer of time analysis and market geometry? W.D. GANN. If you don't know who he is, he's a pioneer of market geometry, author, educator. If you ever heard of GANN squares, GANN fans, that's the guy. Now, was he successful as a trader? Here's an interview with the Wall Street Journal back in 1909. It was known as the Ticker and Investment Digest. This is a famous quote here. During the month of October 1909, in 25 market days, Mr. GANN made, in the presence of our representative, 286 transactions in various stocks on both the long and short side of the market. 264 of these transactions resulted in profits, 22 in losses. Wow, that gets my attention. I want to do what this guy's doing. And so it speaks for itself. Some people have said he's a charlatan, but you know what? I don't see these same people having someone look over the shoulder while they're trading and getting results like this. Now, unfortunately, GANN is no longer with us. He died in the 50s, but his legacy lives on. If you're interested in the man and the techniques that he was using, there's a number of books that he wrote. They're kind of vague in the way that he wrote. He was very Masonic in the way he wrote things. And things have improved with the use of technology, etc., since he's died, and there's been a lot of improvement on his techniques, and that's one of the reasons that this course exists. I got to give credit where credit's due. Thank you, Mr. GANN, Mr. Gartley, for leading the way to get where we are today. But if you're interested in WD GANN, have a look at wdgann.com. Nikki Jones is the owner of the original GANN material. If you want to go to the source, that's the person you want to talk to. So if GANN used time analysis and said it was important, I want to as well. So if we want to add time analysis to our trading systems, how do we do it? This technique is called a time retracement. It's the same as a price retracement, but this time you're going to measure time versus price. So how do we do that? How is it the same as a price retracement? Well, here's an example that we looked at earlier of a price retracement. This first arrow here on the bottom, we measure the low to the high, and that gave us this 78.6% line here. That's our price retracement. The time retracement technique is the same in the sense that you're going to be clicking the low, the first low that you use for the price retracement, and the high that you use for the price retracement. However, do you notice that we have some vertical lines here? This is showing our start point for time. From this date going forward, it counts that many bars over to here. And you notice this time what we're doing, we're measuring on the horizontal axis, the x-axis, the time axis over here. We're measuring time. From the low to the high, we count how many bars there are, and then we can do a time retracement. As we go forward, we can measure that initial leg, that bullish leg that we see here in time. We measure that and we can divide it by certain percentages, just like we did with our price technique. Notice that I have a 161.8% price retracement line right here. So we took how many bars it was in the initial leg up, and we divide it by these Fibonacci percentages or whatever other percentages that you want to use. This is just one example. So since we're measuring time on the horizontal x-axis, we can call this horizontal market geometry. So this is a time retracement. If they're time retracements, are there time extensions? The answer is yes. So just like a price extension, we can do a time extension. Let's have a look. These are the same points that we would use for a price extension. From this low to this high, we measure that price and we project it from this low here. That gives us our 100% price extension. If we use the time extension technique, once again we click this low, but notice the vertical line here is the starting point. We click here, this high. This gives us our end point in time, so measuring that many bars, we project that quantity of bars forward from this low here. So notice that this vertical line says extend it from this date. So counting forward, we can see once we get over to this high over here, that's when we reach the 100% extension. This vertical line here. So it's a useful technique. It uses horizontal market geometry as we're measuring time versus price once again. Let's look at a few other HMG or horizontal market geometry techniques. This is one of the more traditional forms of horizontal market geometry. There are many names for it, but let's call it static cycle analysis. In this example, we measure from a low to a low, as signified by these green lines, and we extend those static cycles forward to identify other future potential lows and highs. There's a low. This lines up with a low. This one is kind of lining up with a high. And then as we start getting farther away from the original cycle, things start to go sideways. This can go forward or backward. Measuring the cycle from between these 2 points here, looking back, we can see that nailed a low and this nailed a high. So here, once again, is another example of horizontal market geometry. Let's look at one more example. This technique allows you to select any high or low and count forward any number of trading or calendar days forward based on Fibonacci numbers. We could call this the Fibonacci interval technique. For example, if you selected this high here, just a single click will allow you to display any number of Fibonacci numbers going forward. Notice that we have here 55, 89 days later, 144 days later, 233 days later, and on and on. And this does have some limited benefit. As you can see, it lines up, at least initially, with highs and lows. GANN used the same technique, but focused on square root numbers. Another adjunct to this method is to select a number of different highs and lows to see if any of the Fibonacci numbers cluster together in certain areas. Bryce Gilmore, Robert Miner, Carolyn Borden, and a number of other traders all swear by this technique. But there is a limitation using any horizontal market geometry technique on its own, by itself. The limitation of using horizontal market geometry on its own is that it lacks the information provided by price analysis. So HMG, or time analysis, used on its own is weak at best. Why? It lacks the information provided by vertical price analysis. But what if we use vertical and horizontal market geometry together? Many successful traders do just that. However, there is often no direct link between these two methods. We'll visit that subject later. For example, if you like 78.6% price retracements, then shouldn't we expect a 78.6% time retracement? I wish it was that easy. If you had to choose between horizontal and vertical, you should always go with vertical. Price analysis is better than time analysis. But GANN talked about time analysis. Is there some way that we can incorporate this instead of these traditional methods that we've gone through already? Is there only horizontal or vertical? Is there some way to combine these two dimensions into one? If you haven't figured it out already, welcome to the world of diagonal market geometry. So a horizontal line reflects price only. That was the limitation with horizontal market geometry. A vertical line reflects time only, and that's the limitation of horizontal market geometry. Whenever we draw a diagonal line, that's a combination of both price and time. Let's look at an example of the superiority of diagonal market geometry over horizontal and vertical. I call it the offset method. Here's an example of a technique that GANN used. If we look at this low here at X up to A, he would measure that price range, and he would see how many points or dollars that would be depending on the product he's trading. And then he would count from this low how many trading days or calendar days forward into the future, so that he would call this a squaring of price and time, where price and time would be equal to each other, and then he would expect a reversal on that date. And that's what we have right here. We have some horizontal market geometry here with a reversal at this low based on his techniques. Useful information, but limited. Let's have a look at the offset method. We have the same chart, the low to the high, but this time we've drawn a square based on the angle of this line from the low to the high, and we create a square. See, notice this diagonal market geometry. Notice the blending of price and time with this diagonal line from the low to the high, and then reflecting that forward like this. I've created the squares just so that you can compare it with GANN's squares, but really all we care about is this line right here, this diagonal line coming down from the high. This adds a lot more value than the previous technique. Why? Because notice how this diagonal line shows levels of support and resistance. So here's resistance, here's resistance, here's support, here is support, here's a bunch of support and resistance until we get to the intersection here. And this is where the rubber meets the road. This is the beauty of diagonal market geometry. This is giving you a precise point in time and price where you would expect a reversal. And so this is the beauty of blending the two dimensions together, time and price together, to give you exact points in the future where you'd expect a reversal. And you can see that the market reversed, not exactly to the tick, of course, and we should be realistic about this, but it provides a lot more useful information than these other ones that rely solely on horizontal or vertical. The ancient Greeks believed in 3 ingredients for beauty: symmetry, proportion, and harmony. The Egyptians referred to order as mat. We all look for mat or order, symmetry, proportion, harmony on price charts, whether you like it or not. On the conscious or the subconscious level, we are looking to create order out of chaos. Harmony, beauty, proportion, balance. If we don't see it, we have a desire to create it ourselves. W.D. GANN, he said, when price and time square, change is inevitable. That's true. When time and price come together and they display symmetry, change is inevitable. So rather than saying when time and price square, what we really should say is when there is symmetry between price and time, change is inevitable. So the symmetry between price and time, the best way that that can be reflected on a price chart is through the use of diagonal market geometry. DMG shows us the hidden symmetry in the markets, and that gives us an edge. There are definite advantages of using diagonal market geometry. The good news for you is that most traders don't use geometry. The reason is that it's not used more is that on the surface, using geometry to trade would appear to be highly subjective, something that always seems to work after the fact. They'll give lip service to trend lines and admit that they work, but often won't use them in a trading system. Now, why is that? It's very difficult to code algorithms that use dynamic time and price ratios. Now, this scares a lot of traders away from market geometry, but they're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. This in itself gives us an edge in an increasingly algorithmic trading world. And the ultimate edge is that diagonal market geometry adds the time dimension in a way that has a direct link with price. a blending of price and time, two dimensions into one. Now that you're sold on diagonal market geometry, I hope, we're now going to move from vertical to diagonal and skip using horizontal techniques on their own. So what can we expect for the rest of level 2? I've broken it down into 5 sections. The first one is where we are right now, the introduction to the course. The next section will be our core trade setup, followed by a number of different filters that we can use on our core trade setup. Then we can choose from a number of peripheral strategies, and we'll outline that here in a minute. And then the final session will be entitled Squaring the Circle. Our core trade setup is going to be the Beck's emblem along with the quadrilateral. The Beck's emblem is going to replace the price retracement technique. So that's going to take some getting used to. We're moving from horizontal lines to diagonal lines, and the Beck's emblem is going to allow you to do that. And it's only through repeated use of the technique and the tools to prove it to yourself that it works. We're going to combine the Beck's emblem with the quadrilateral in the same way that we combine price retracements and price extensions together. Now we're going to use the emblem and the quad together. So here's an example of the Beck's emblem. We're going from this high over here down to this low. And remember that square that we looked at earlier? See, there's that angle that we identified and how we can find support on that angle. But there's a number of different lines created by the emblem, and we can see that this line here is really important for us. We'll find out what line that is later, but this identified the high. So the emblem is going to, all these different lines replace Fibonacci lines. They improve the reliability of our analysis. As you can see, the market does respond to these lines. So we'll replace retracements with the emblem. This is our core trade setup. We have the Beck's emblem is going to be combined with the quadrilateral. The quadrilateral replaces the price extension technique, and it provides a lot more information, just like the emblem does. So rather than using the price extension technique by clicking those 3 data points, we're going to use the same 3 data points to draw the quad. And when we get to the tip of the quad, that's going to provide a time and price level that we can expect a reversal to take place at. So once we have our core trade set up down with the Beck's emblem and the quadrilateral, it's time to add some filters. We have 5 different filters that we can choose from, and we don't have to use them all. We can choose them a la carte depending on our personal trading style. The filters are, first off, the ZBD line. The next one is Trajan's trident. Time price vectors. The circumscribed objective. And volume. We'll go through each one of these. Here's an example of the ZBD line. We have applied the emblem to the screen, but the ZBD line we can see is this line that goes down here, and it lines up with, we'll learn about some new labels, the Y, the Z. We already know about A, B, C, D, but we're going to learn about Y and Z later on. And you draw a line from Z to B, and we extend that. In the Gartley trading method, I talked about the Wolf wave, and this is just a refined version of the Wolf wave that allows us to give us additional proof that there should be a reversal at the D point. This is what I refer to as Trajan's trident, and once again it's using the Z point and this high here to create something that's very similar to Andrew's pitchforks, and it creates a line down in this area here for the D point. We're just trying to find out where that D point is, and if we have some additional filters to point us in the right direction, give us a higher level of confidence, we will use those. Notice these are all diagonal lines. We're also going to use time price vectors. Bradley Cowan has written extensively on this topic, and I'd strongly recommend that you pick up a copy of his book. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But the time price vector technique allows us to once again blend time and price together in such a way that we can identify turning points at the completion of the D point. And the last filter we'll be considering is called the circumscribed objective. And this was something that was written about a long time ago in the 30s. And we have to use our circle drawing tool. And we have this diagonal line here from C going up to once again help us find the D point in price and time. So a number of different filters that we'll be adding to our core trade setup. We'll also consider some peripheral strategies after we've looked at the filters, and we'll be looking at, first off, options. A lot of people wonder how they can use options in conjunction with our diagonal market geometry. And I'll be keeping this really simple in the sense that if you know anything about options, there is no end to how many different strategies that you can use. So I'll cover off a couple of very basic ones that we can use in conjunction with the single in scale out method of money management. In addition, we're going to look at statistical arbitrage. If you haven't heard that before, it's just a fancy name for pairs trading. And if you haven't heard of that before, you're basically trading one product against another very similar product. For an example, two tech stocks within the same sector going long on one and short on the other one. If they've both had a very high level of correlation between each other, and one of them deviates substantially, then that can provide an opportunity for statistical arbitrage. So I got a session on that as well. If you want to add that as a peripheral strategy, you can. It's your choice. The final session of the Apprentice Level 2 will be called Squaring the Circle. And in that session, we're going to quantify the unquantifiable. How can you quantify the unquantifiable? Well, like I mentioned before, there's a lot of traders that believe that market geometry is just too subjective, that it's not realistic to use this in a trading system, and that's what we will discuss in that session. We are going to quantify all these methods. Otherwise, they're pretty much a waste of time. We can talk about using market geometry all day long, but if you cannot plug this into a computer at some level and it's too subjective, we're going to run into some problems. Being able to code what we're learning here in regard to geometry is essential at some point. As long as we can move in that direction, that's a good thing. We're going to quantify the unquantifiable. So let's review what we've covered off in part 1 of level 2. We identified 3 different types of market geometry. Number 1, the vertical axis, the price axis, how to measure that. The typical tools that we used in Initiate Level 1 are the price retracement and price extension techniques. That would be vertical market geometry. The other dimension is time. We refer to that as horizontal market geometry. And we looked at a number of traditional methods of measuring time, like a time retracement, static time cycles, and Fibonacci intervals. Then we looked at diagonal market geometry, DMG, a blending of price and time together. One of the advantages is that most people don't use geometry, especially diagonal market geometry, and that's a good thing. We've all heard that most people lose money trading, so we just need to do the opposite of what the rookies are doing. If they are not using geometry, I definitely want to. And the ultimate edge is that diagonal market geometry adds the time dimension in a way that has a direct link with price analysis, a blending of the two measurements into one. Rather than separating time and price and using techniques to measure them individually, we're going to do it together. Michael Jenkins, a successful GANN trader, believes that time and price are the same thing. I don't know if I'd go that far, but let's use diagonal market geometry that blends price and time together. After establishing the fact that diagonal market geometry is where we want to go, we had an overview of the 5 component parts of the Apprentice Level 2 course. Number 1, the introduction. We just finished that. Number 2, the core trade setup. That's going to be our Beck's emblem and quadrilateral combo. Then we looked at a number of different filters that we can choose from. Then we looked at some peripheral strategies, options, and statistical arbitrage. These are things we can add if we choose to. And then finally, the last session is going to be called Squaring the Circle, quantifying the so-called unquantifiable. On our next video, we'll learn about a very cool discovery I made when putting together my book, The Gartley Trading Method. The ultimate weapon of the geometric trader is the Beck's emblem.